In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Philadelphia 76ers. Obviously, us NBA fans know that over the especially recent history, and especially over really the last few months, the Sixers have kind of been the most interesting team to talk about in the NBA with their whole situation, with their young core, and with Ben Simmons and him wanting out, and him needing to get traded, and them wanting to trade him because of how he's regressing as a player right now, and everything that's gone on in general with their overall franchise, and everything that's gone on with their franchise really over the last 8 years as well, with this process called exactly the process. And like I said in the title of today's video, I think that ultimately this process has failed for the 76ers, unfortunately. And personally, I'm definitely not a big fan of the 76ers. As you guys know, if you watch the channel, I'm a Raptors fan, but I'm gonna make this video without bias. You're gonna hear me say a lot of good things about the Sixers in this video, but you also will hear me say a lot of bad things about the Sixers, and ultimately why I think the process has failed. And I'm sure a lot of you guys would agree with me, looking at the situation the Sixers are in right now and what they're dealing with and how it's really not looking good for them. So let's get into the video. I'm going to start basically by talking about the entire process, where there was good points, where there was bad points, and ultimately where they went wrong. So let's get into it. So let's start in the 2013 and 14 season, when this is really the first year of the process for the 76ers. They blew up their whole team and they were absolutely awful and started this gruesome rebuild, and definitely starting from the bottom and having a horrible team. In this season, they finished with a 19-63 record, which is obviously horrible, second last in the Eastern Conference. The following season, in the 2014 and 15 season, they finished with pretty much the same record, one win less at 18-64, still second last in the Eastern Conference. And then 2015 and 16 was the worst year for them, one of the worst years, if not the very worst year that we have ever seen from a team in NBA history, going 10-72 and obviously finishing last in the Eastern Conference. During this time, we saw the Sixers in the first year in 2013 have a draft pick of Michael Carter-Williams, who they selected 11th overall in that NBA draft, and originally this was looking like a really good pick, as MCW was showing his ability to be a very good playmaker, electric around the rim and pretty good defensively, and actually won the Rookie of the Year in 2013-14 season. But unfortunately, after this, that was actually the best year of his career pretty much, and he regressed ever since, and his game really never fit into the modern day style of the NBA. And as we know, he's still in the NBA right now and just struggling to stay in the league because he really can't shoot at all. He's very inefficient, and even in that season only shot 40% from the field and can't really shoot the three at all. And after this season, the 2014 draft was upcoming, and this is where the Sixers got their biggest hit in the NBA draft, and this is really what started the different direction of their franchise, as with the third overall pick that year, they selected Joel Embiid. As we know, looking in hindsight, he's obviously their franchise player now, a top 10 player in the league considered by most, including myself, and last year was in the top 2 for MVP. And the main theme of this video is going to be the Sixers draft picks and their first round draft pick every year and how they went. And as you guys know, if you watch this channel, I used to do a redraft series that I recently ended, and I love looking back at past drafts because draft picks are so hard to judge. At the time, they seem like easy picks, but looking in hindsight, some of these draft picks are so bad and some of them are so good. There are huge busts and huge steals in every draft, and redrafts obviously look very different than actual drafts, but this pick right here was definitely a big hit for the 76ers at number 3. And as I mentioned, the one before that in 2013 with MCW was unfortunately a miss for them. Now, upcoming in the 2015 NBA draft, the Sixers once again had the third overall pick, and this time selected Jahlil Okafor. And obviously, over the last decade, this is probably one of the biggest busts that we've ever seen, as Okafor has obviously never been able to pursue his NBA career and live up to the hype that he had going into that draft. So this is obviously a big bust of a pick. And in that season, the 2015 and 16 season, the Sixers, that was their historically horrible year, and that was mostly because Joel Embiid was injured and Dario Saric was their best player. So because Embiid was out, they weren't able to do anything that season. And then in the next year in 2016, this is where pretty much everything was looking in the right direction at the time for the Sixers, as they had the first overall pick in this draft and selected Ben Simmons, who everyone thought and knew that he was going to be the first overall pick in that NBA draft. And this is where things are starting to look a little bit in the right direction for the Sixers. Ben Simmons wasn't able to have a healthy season and missed pretty much all of the season, and Joel Embiid still only played 30 games, but in those 30 games put up 20 points per game, showed his promise of being a dominant big man down low in the post, and overall put up, like I said, 20 points per game on 58.5% true shooting, and even showed a glimpse of a three-point shot, which is very promising for this team. And also they had a veteran guy like Robert Covington now on the team, who provided a lot for them defensively and shooting the three ball. A guy like Ersan Ilyasova, who had a career year that year and was able to put up about 15 points per game. And Dario Saric also continued to improve, and this was, as we look now in hindsight, pretty much the prime of his career, and he also put up about 13 points per game here on decent efficiency. So this team was looking all right, and they finished with a 28-54 record, but still finished second last in the Eastern Conference. Now in the next season, starting 2017, the 2017 and 18 season, this is where the Sixers turned it around and became a winning franchise, and overall had a 52-30 record, got eliminated in the second round of the playoffs, but finished third in the Eastern Conference, and the process was finally starting to look like a success. And obviously they had a very successful year compared to the last 4 years where they were in the bottom two in the Eastern Conference. Joel Embiid had an incredible season, putting up 23 points per game on 57.5% true shooting, which at that time was above average, and also showed his value defensively, and still showed that he was a classic dominant traditional big man. Ben Simmons had a fully healthy year last year, won Rookie of the Year that season, even though technically he shouldn't have really been eligible. He was, because he missed pretty much all of that previous season, and he also had pretty much, actually in hindsight now, the best year of his career in his rookie season, putting up 16 points per game on 54.5% from the field, along with 8.2 assists per game and 8.1 rebounds, and showed how he was turning into a very good perimeter defender as well. So there was a lot of promise for this team, but little did they know that in that offseason during the NBA draft, pretty much what would have them end up failing this process in the future of their franchise, which by the way is right now, might have happened in that offseason. In the 2017 draft, they did have the first overall pick once again, and of course, as we know, in this draft selected Markelle Fultz. And obviously, especially in the first year here, this did not go over well at all, as Markelle Fultz definitely had some injury problems. He had some psychological problems as well, and clearly just was not ready at all for the NBA. No matter what he did in college or in workouts, that was pretty much thrown out the window, because he was simply just not ready for the NBA physically and mentally. And in that season for the Sixers, he only played 19 games, averaged a grand total of 7 points per game, shot 40.5% from the field, which was very bad for him, especially at that time compared to what he had done in college, and overall shot 47.5% from the free throw line. We all know that one clip of Markelle Fultz going to the free throw line about to take a free throw, and he went up for the shot and actually did not release the shot, and then went back to shoot it again. And this clip right here really just shows, pretty much sums up his mental issues when he actually got into the NBA, and how he just was not ready for that kind of pressure. And as we know, he ended up in the next season getting traded pretty shortly, and actually right now in the NBA, he's starting to develop a little bit more and show that, especially with the Orlando Magic, he might be able to still develop into a decent role player. But obviously the Sixers were not patient enough for that. They traded him, and this was an absolute bust of a pick, and it might have cost them a lot in the future of building up this franchise. Now also in this season, the 2017 and 2018 season, in the 2018 playoffs, the Sixers were looking decently promising as they won the first round against the Miami Heat in 5 games, 4-1, but then in the second round lost in 5 games to Kyrie Irving Celtics, and just didn't have that firepower yet, and they could tell that they were definitely heading in the right direction as a franchise and were turning into more of a winning franchise, but they weren't ready yet to succeed in the playoffs. Now in 2018 and 2019, this was the best team that the Sixers had. Looking in hindsight, is the best team that they had throughout this entire process. And they were really going all in for it this season, as Joel Embiid was having a career year, putting up about 27.5 points per game on 59.5% true shooting in the regular season, and playing his best defensive season and still dominating in the post. Ben Simmons was getting a little bit worse already, but still was providing some good passing, some good interior scoring, and great perimeter defense on the other side of the floor. And at the trade deadline, as we know, they went out and got Jimmy Butler, who at the time was still absolutely playing like a top 20 player in the game for sure. He provided some great defense for them as well, and he could go get a bucket in the clutch when you needed him to as well. They went out and got Tobias Harris, who could also put up 20 points per game for them, and that's exactly what he did that season. A very underrated scoring option for them and a great shooter. And overall, they had some great perimeter shooting as well, some perimeter shooting specialists, a guy like JJ Redick, who was very valuable for them that season, Landry Shamet, who shot the three very well, and a guy like Furkan Korkmaz. So they pretty much had it all as a team. Their superstar player who was playing at an MVP type of level, a great supporting cast around him, and some very good shooting around him as well, and a very, very good defensive team, having pretty much three all-defensive caliber players on the same team, a great perimeter defender in Ben Simmons, an amazing interior defender in Joel Embiid, and one of the best overall defenders in the game in Jimmy Butler. Now this season, the Sixers pretty much got unlucky. Like I said, I'm a Raptors fan, and that series in the second round between them and the Raptors was probably one of, if not the best series I've ever seen. The teams went back and forth, and as a Raptors fan, I was legitimately scared that they were going to get eliminated in this round here. And this is two teams right here, by the way, who really, really needed this, because I don't think the Sixers knew this at the time, but this was pretty much the best that their team was ever going to get during this process. The Raptors obviously knew that with the Kawhi situation and how he was essentially a one-year rental for them, but both teams needed to win this series, and we all know how it ends. I'll put the picture on the screen right now and not even describe what happens, because we all know what this is. For me as a Raptors fan, this is the best moment in basketball history that I have ever witnessed, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree with me too. Just an absolutely insane moment. But if we're being honest, this was a very, very lucky moment for them. A one-shot thing that took 4 bounces on the rim, and in order to be good, you need to be lucky, and the Sixers got unlucky here. They had the team that was absolutely good enough to win the NBA championship, and as an honest Raptors fan, I'm fully admitting that. This team was absolutely good enough to win the championship. Like I said, they had a great superstar, great overall offense, shooting surrounding them, and a great defensive team, and they had what it takes to win the championship that year, and it didn't work out for them. And in that offseason, they ended up losing Jimmy Butler. They also lost JJ Redick, who this doesn't seem like a big thing for them, but he was absolutely their sharpshooter and provided a lot of value for them that way offensively. And losing a sharpshooter and floor spacer when you guys have like Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons on your team, who obviously play most of the time in the paint, this was a very valuable asset for the Sixers that they lost as well. And overall as a team, they lost some depth, and really they weren't the same team going into the next season. In the 2019 and 20 season, the Sixers ended up 6th in the Eastern Conference and still had a playoff worthy team, but in that year got swept in the first round by the Boston Celtics in the NBA bubble, and it's not looking good for them overall as a team. Now I'll be the first to admit that going into the 2020 and 2021 season, I expected pretty much the same thing from the Sixers here, but they absolutely proved me wrong. They added some shooting like Seth Curry, who was a very reliable shooter for them last season, Danny Green, who still shot 40% from 3 despite his poor run in the playoffs with the Lakers, and Tobias Harris continued to be a great 3-point shooter for them. That was my main doubt for them, was their shooting, but they definitely got better. Joel Embiid had obviously an incredible season, nearly averaging 30 points per game on above 60% true shooting, and as we know, finished 2nd for MVP voting, and things are looking good for the Sixers again, as they were the #1 seed last season in the Eastern Conference. They win the first round of the NBA playoffs, and then in that next series against the Atlanta Hawks, it goes to 7 games once again, and they're not able to contain Trae Young and the Hawks. Ben Simmons had the worst offensive series in the history of the game from an all-star, and really he regressed every single season, and at this point he is the problem for this team. Joel Joel played relatively well in that series, but the Hawks defense was very good. Trae Young ended up having a very good series at times, and the role players on the Hawks stepped up way better than the role players on the 76ers, and overall Ben Simmons definitely looked like the problem here. When we look at his career stats, he has pretty much gotten worse every single year of his career, even if it's just by a little bit, and his inability to shoot the three is really haunting the Sixers right now, as when he's on the floor, their spacing is a lot worse, and in today's NBA, especially with a team like the Sixers, who have their main guy in Joel Embiid playing in the post pretty much all the time, Ben Simmons needs that three-point shot, and he simply does not have it, and he doesn't even have the confidence to shoot the basketball on any part of the floor anymore. And if you guys want more of my thoughts on Ben Simmons, be sure to check out the video I'm putting at the right-hand side of the screen right now. I have some thoughts on Ben Simmons as well about how his confidence has gone down and what he needs to do to get his career back on track. But as for now, for the Philadelphia 76ers in this offseason, they really want to trade Ben Simmons but are asking way too much for him. For example, they tried to trade him to the Toronto Raptors but offered him for Fred VanVleet, who, first of all, by the way, as a Raptors fan, I would not even trade Ben Simmons for Fred VanVleet straight up. VanVleet is still a very good defender, a way better shooter, and way more valuable offensively, and I think that should pretty much go without saying. They also offered him for Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, and a first-round pick, and there were rumors too that they asked for multiple picks in this deal, and overall, this is a prime example of the Sixers thinking that Ben Simmons is way more valuable right now than he actually is, so I think it'll be a struggle for them to trade him, and now it's at the point where Ben Simmons actually might not even report to training camp, and because of this, his trade value will most likely significantly go down as well. So now they're stuck in a spot where some guy that they thought was their franchise player, who's actually getting worse year by year, is not reporting to training camp and has way less trade value than they expected, and overall as a team they're looking like a complete mess and looking like the process has pretty much failed. For all we know, the Sixers could come back next year, Embiid could have another MVP season, and they could be contenders once again in the Eastern Conference, but it's certainly not looking that way with the Ben Simmons situation and how they're going to lose the guy that they thought was the second option for this team. So this is pretty much the journey for the 76ers and ultimately how they've got to the point where it looks like the process that they've gone through is pretty much going to end up failing with the situation that they're in right now with Ben Simmons, and also how their supporting cast around Joel Embiid, even if Ben Simmons ends up getting traded, is really not good enough to win that championship, at least in my opinion from what I'm seeing. And really what I think has got the Sixers to this point where it looks like they're going to end up failing this process, if I had to pinpoint one thing of how they have actually come to the point where they failed the process, I think it's got to be their drafting. Like I said, drafting is something that is so important and so unpredictable. I mean, a lot of these players at the time when you're looking at the draft, you have no clue if they're going to end up a bust, like some of the guys the Sixers picked, or some steals, like many steals that we've seen over the years, like for example Nikola Jokic being picked 41st overall, Giannis being projected to go in the second round of the NBA draft, and the Bucks ended up picking him 15th overall, which is probably the best pick of the decade. Incredible scouting obviously from that team, but it's very obvious that you need incredible scouting and kind of even maybe that gut feeling, and in other words kind of a little bit of luck when it comes to drafting. And unfortunately the Sixers just did not have this. They didn't have good enough scouting and they didn't have good enough luck to end up with guys that were actually able to succeed at the NBA level. For example, picking Michael Carter-Williams 11th overall in 2013 when guys like Giannis and Rudy Gobert were still on the board. In 2014, picking Elfrid Payton 10th overall when guys like Zach LaVine, who was picked 13th overall, was still on the board. TJ Warren, who was picked 14th overall, still on the board. Yusuf Nurkic picked 16th overall, still on the board. Clint Capella, 25th overall, still on the board. And obviously Nikola Jokic, who was picked 41st overall. No one would have had good enough scouting to pick Jokic that good or that early on in the draft, but all of these guys still on the board during this NBA draft. In 2015, picking Jahlil Okafor with the 3rd overall pick. when guys like Devin Booker, Kristaps Porzingis, and Miles Turner were still on the board here. And of course in 2017, picking Markelle Fultz first overall in this draft, when guys like Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, De'Aaron Fox, John Collins, OG Anunoby, and even Lonzo Ball were still on the board here. So bottom line, the Sixers did a lot of good things during this process to get their team to a point where they were good enough to contend for a championship. They did a lot of bad things along the way, but mainly the thing that I think ended them up to get to this point was their bad drafting and unfortunately their bad luck and bad scouting to get them to the point where they weren't able to succeed in the NBA draft a lot of the time. So there you guys have it. Those are my thoughts on the Philadelphia 76ers, what they've done over the course of the last 7 to 8 years with quote-unquote the process, and how I think it's ultimately failed. This is actually the first 20+ minute video on the channel, my longest video on the channel so far. So if you made it to the end of the video, you guys are an absolute legend. I appreciate you guys for real. And if you're new to the channel, I definitely worked very hard on this video, so I'd appreciate it if you guys could leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new. I appreciate you guys for watching again, and I really hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.